This is ProBlogger.
Hi there, it's Darren from ProBlogger. Welcome to episode 175 of the ProBlogger podcast. As I said, my name is Darren Rowse and I'm the blogger behind ProBlogger.com, a blog, a podcast that you're listening to now, an event, a job board, and a series of ebooks, all designed to help you as a blogger to grow your audience. And if you haven't started a blog, to start a blog too, and to make money from that blog. You can find out more about ProBlogger at ProBlogger.com. Now, in today's lesson, I want to tell you a story. And it's a story of advice that I was given when I was just starting out. Advice that it turns out I completely ignored. It's a story of regret and a story that I hope might move you into taking some more action in your blog and your business. You can find today's show notes where I do have a little bit of further reading for you at ProBlogger.com/podcast/175.
Creating great content, finding an audience, building engagement, monetizing your blog. This is ProBlogger.
Have you ever been given the advice, don't give up your day job? You know, back in 2004, I was given that advice numerous times, quite a few in fact. I'd been blogging for about a year and a half, and I just discovered that you could make money from blogging. Now, by no means was it much money. I was only making a few dollars a day at first, but I was beginning to see the possibilities of monetizing blogs, and the dream of going full-time as a blogger had begun to grow in my mind. Now, at first, I didn't tell anyone about this dream of going full-time with my blogging, but as my income began to grow, I couldn't help myself. I began to tell a few friends and family members about these dreams. And whilst most of my friends and family were very encouraging, or at least they humoured me without saying anything negative, I did get that advice quite a few times when I would tell them that one day I might become a full-time blogger. Their advice was, don't give up your day job. Now, often those words were said in a gentle, joking tone. It was kind of almost like don't give up your day job. It's kind of like a funny kind of saying that people would say. But sometimes they were actually telling me not to give up my day job. And their advice was well-meaning. And in some ways it was wise advice too, because, who had ever heard of a full-time blogger back in 2004? Most of my friends didn't even know what a blog was, let alone know of anyone who was a full-time blogger. So there was some wisdom in their advice, and it was well-intentioned. Now, I didn't take it to heart, and I certainly didn't let those words have much of an impact upon me, because basically over the coming years, I did begin to give up my day job. And I would say, actually, it was day jobs, because at the time I was working a number of part-time jobs. I was working as a youth worker and a minister in a church. I was working in a factory packing parcels. I was working in an in-flight catering kitchen putting food on trays. I was working as a casual labourer doing things like assembling Cirque du Soleil tents. I only did that one day. It was too hard for me. And I was also studying part-time. So I had the luxury of having lots of different jobs that I was working, and gradually over the coming year or so, I began to give up those day jobs. It was a gradual process. It certainly didn't happen overnight, and it took me a year or so to really give them all up to the point where I was a full-time blogger. And I will link in today's show notes to the full story if you are interested in reading that. But over that time, I did begin to give up those day jobs, and the before and after shots of my life from 2003, 2004 to now in 2017, they're quite remarkably different. My life is very different today because of blogging. And I'm so glad I didn't listen to that well-intentioned advice and gentle ribbing of my friends not to give up my day job. Now, a year or two ago, I caught up with a friend who's a long-term friend. And this friend reminded me that he was one of these people who used to say to me, don't give up your day job, way back in 2004. Now, I don't remember this friend actually ever saying those words to me, but a year or so ago, we caught up for a coffee and he kind of confessed to me that he'd said those words. And he'd been feeling guilty about it because he'd been thinking about it ever since. And he worried that perhaps I had been harboring some kind of resentment to him for telling me not to give up my day job. Now, he was quite relieved to know that I didn't even remember him saying that. But one of the things that interested me in that conversation with my friend is that he also told me that he regularly wondered what would have happened if instead of saying, don't give up your day job, he'd actually said, how can I do it too?
You're listening to ProBlogger.
You see, my friend is quite similar to me. He's got lots of interests, he's a good communicator, he's a gatherer of ideas, he's a researcher, and he's got an entrepreneurial kind of spirit within him. He thinks about things in an entrepreneurial way. And he told me as we caught up for this coffee that when he saw me starting my first blogs back in 2002, 2003, 2004, that part of him wanted to do the same thing. He thought it would be fun. He thought it might have opened some doors of opportunity for him. But he also had these other voices going through his mind at the same time. And voices that said things like, all the topics have been taken, everyone else has already started all the blogs. What if it doesn't work? What if it's a waste of time? I'm too late. What if I look stupid? There were little excuses running through his mind, little bits of fear, little worries that he had. And so instead of saying, how can I do it too? He said, don't give up your day job. And he told me that he'd regretted that for 10 years. Now, as he told me that, there was this pause in our conversation where we both kind of reflected upon the decade that had gone by ever since and how things had played out for both of us. Now, by no means had his life turned out badly. He's got a great family. He's had success in the employment that he's had over those 10 years. And on the other side of things, neither has my life been a complete fairy tale. You know, building your own business is tough. But there was a real sense of regret in his demeanour. In the conversation, he then went on to tell me that he wished he hadn't missed the boat of getting into blogging, and that for the last 10 years, he'd still wondered if he should still start a blog or a podcast or a YouTube channel. He, in the last few years, had even brainstormed topics that he could start a blog on. He'd bought a domain. He'd planned out content ideas. He'd even bought my book, the ProBlogger book, without telling me a few years ago. But the thing that continued to hold him back is that when he looked at what was happening on the web today and how it had developed, he kept saying to himself, it's too late to start. It's too late to build anything that could be substantial today. And he had this feeling that everyone else had all the topics already. And it was that moment in our conversation that I just felt like jumping up from the table and shaking him, because you see, I had those same feelings back in 2002, 2003. I remember back when I first started my first blogs and started to monetize them, that I looked at those fledgling little blogs that I had and I started to compare them to all the other bloggers who'd already been at it for 2 or 3 years. I remember when I first started my first photography blog, looking around the web and thinking, there's already hundreds of other photography sites out there. How could I ever build anything of significance? I looked at the following that others had built, the influence that they had, the skills that they'd accumulated, and I distinctly remember thinking to myself, I'm too late.
Creating great content and building your audience. This is ProBlogger.
Now, I suspect most bloggers have felt that same thing at one point or another, and you listening to this right now have probably had those feelings and maybe have them right now. We all tend to compare ourselves to others further along on the journey, and many of us have these feelings of inadequacy when we do have those moments of comparison. It's completely natural to have those feelings, but it's such a shame to let them overwhelm you to the point of paralysis, like my friend. You see, I don't think it's too late today. If anything, this revolution that's happening around us on the internet at the moment is only just beginning. We're in the early days of this. You know, sure, there are so many people engaging in creating content on the web, but with that comes opportunity, and alongside that we see an expanded audience. There's still parts of the world that are coming online today. Our audience has the potential of growing. You know, as one of my favorite social media practitioners, Gary Vaynerchuk, put in his book, The Thank You Economy, he says, there's a gold rush happening. Where are you? Now, Gary said that back in 2008 in his book, but I still think it's a completely relevant message today. Now, I want to be really clear here. I'm not saying you should quit your day job today. That would not be responsible, particularly if you haven't started blogging yet or if you're in the early days of your blog. But if that's a dream for you, there are things you can do today about it. The key is to do something today. The key is to start today if you haven't started. The key is to get over the fact that you're not the first and to start creating something that matters today. The key is to get the ideas that swim around in your mind out of your mind and to take some action on them today. The key is to start developing your voice and putting your ideas out there today. The key is to start building your network and an audience today. The key is to start developing skills that you need for this today. The key is to move past your fear of not being good enough or not having the skills and to take your first small steps today. The key is to do something today. Thanks for listening. Over the next few weeks, we will be starting a series on ProBlogger about how to start a blog. But you can start today. You don't need to wait for that series, but we will be providing you with some further content to help you on that journey. In today's show notes, I'm going to link back to that story of me starting my blog and the progression of giving up some of those day jobs, but I'm also going to link to an article I wrote last year on how to start a blog. And so if this is something that you've been putting off, I really would encourage you to go and read that particular article today and to register that domain to begin to brainstorm topics and to begin to put that blog together today. Look forward to seeing what happens as a result of that journey today. You can find today's show notes over at ProBlogger.com/podcast/175. Do something today.
You've been listening to ProBlogger. If you'd like to comment on any of today's topics or subscribe to the series, find us at ProBlogger.com/podcast. Tweet us at ProBlogger. Find us at Facebook.com/ProBlogger or search ProBlogger on iTunes.
This episode of the ProBlogger podcast was edited by the team at Podcast Motor, who offer a great range of services, including helping you to set up and launch your podcast, as well as ongoing editing and production of the podcast that you produce. You can check them out at podcastmotor.com.